Human Torch is definitely one of those heroes that can turn the outcome of a game. He's a high skill character with a pretty weird playstyle that can make him hard to counter, but even more so difficult to play. Since he is so hard to play, his win rate is dramatically low. But thankfully, I solo queued all the way to Celestial by only playing Human Torch in record pace. So today, especially thanks to the recent buffs, which didn't hit until after my grind, we are going to correct that and teach you how to properly play Human Torch in Marvel Rivals. As usual, this guide, notes, and the script itself was already available early on and is available ad-free on our Patreon. Let's dive into it. Human Torch is a flyer hero, meaning that no matter what you do, he will always be flying in one way, shape, or another. You can maneuver him around with your control keys, including ascend and descend, and since he kind of floats around solely, making sure that you practice good dodge patterns will make a huge difference here. I sort of spam the same movement pattern of going left and right and sometimes up and down, but you should figure something out that works for you, and the more sporadic the movements, the longer you will find that you can stay alive, even when enemies are looking at you. The trick is figuring out how to move around and be difficult to hit, while also having the movement on autopilot so you can focus on hitting your abilities, hitting your shots, and how you position yourself. Activating Human Torch's ability, Plasma Body, will level up his movement and grant an additional 50% movement speed for up to 8 seconds at a time. The amount of charge you have is visible here on the screen, sort of like a stamina bar, and the Plasma Body charges as soon as it isn't in use and charges faster than it depletes, so you get it back pretty damn fast. Using some abilities like your primary fire, secondary fire, or your slam, and we're gonna cover all of these later, will cancel your Plasma Body form, but other things such as using your Pyro Prison, your team up abilities, or meleeing will not. With that in mind, since using these abilities puts you in a different animation and adds some value, then it makes sense to use these abilities when you need to make yourself, and most importantly, your head, difficult to hit. If I'm finding myself exposed to too many enemies and need to get behind cover, then I normally turn on that Plasma Body and hold the melee key while trying to get out of dodge. It is a lot better than just slowly gliding downwards in one line. Staying elusive while trying to hit all of your buttons and holding the Plasma Body key at the same time is going to be pretty difficult, so I suggest going into your settings and turning it to toggle from the default hold so you have that one finger free. The Plasma Body will keep burning through your stamina.
Say that again?
The Plasma Body will keep burning through your stamina, even if you aren't moving around, so make sure you don't just keep it on for no reason while not paying attention. Human Torch's primary fire is a slow-moving shotgun projectile blast that can headshot. This thing can deal a ton of damage when it's up close, with all the pellets hitting the head, about 175 damage or so, and since it is a projectile, it doesn't really have any damage fall-off. Sure, there will be damage fall-off due to not all projectiles hitting, but that also means that it is a lot more forgiving as a tank buster than anything else. These flame icons in the middle of your screen show how much ammo that you have, but they recharge really fast, so it really just stops you from spamming it non-stop, which you probably won't be finding yourself doing much anyways. And despite its decent damage potential, misusing the fire cluster is the first thing that most Human Torch players get wrong. First, since it is a shotgun, most Human Torch players want to get up real close, which can be completely fine, but then they try using the typical aim trick where you aim to the right of your enemy, only to notice that, wait a minute, your shots just don't hit. And that's for one simple reason. The fire cluster has 3 different animations: animation speeds and point of origin. The animations do go in the same order every time, even if you use an ability in between, and if you aren't aware of them and lead your shots slightly differently each time, then you will end up missing every shot in a row. I suggest trying to unlearn or at least avoid using the habit of aiming to the right of your enemies when you are playing Human Torch, or getting used to adjusting your aim accordingly every single shot. But you also need to stay aware of the different animation speeds, since this one really messes you up if you aren't tracking your target perfectly. The first 2 seem to be about the same speed, but the third shot is a lot faster and it comes from the right of your character rather than the left. So when it comes to that third shot, I try to straight up track onto my target or ahead of it over ranges as much as possible. Otherwise, I know I'm going to end up missing and being thrown off guard by the very fast animation. Since it is a shotgun, the fire cluster also has a bit of a random spread to it, so even if you do lead perfectly and you do aim well, sometimes you're going to hit more shots and sometimes you're just going to hit fewer. For the same reason, it is worth it to go for the center of mass shots rather than headshots unless the enemies are right in your face. And as long as they aren't looking at you, it will be a lot easier trying to hit them from a slight angle rather than from straight above. Depending on the targets, you'll get your money's worth with the center of mass shots against smaller, fire non-vanguard targets at about 10 meters. Most vanguards can give you good meat shots at 15 meters, and big boys like Venom or Hulk can give you full meat shots as far as 20 meters away, sometimes even farther, especially if Hulk uses his ultimate. That being said, spamming your primary fire, especially with how inconsistent it can feel, is really hard, so that is why we have his secondary fire as well, which we can weave in for additional damage and consistency. Human Torch's secondary fire shoots a faster moving projectile that deals 40 damage upon landing and sets fire to the ground for the next 6 seconds. Enemies who stand on top of the fire will take 25 damage a second. Without using your other abilities, you can have up to 5 of these fires active at a time. You can have up to 3 charges available at a time, and they recharge every 2 seconds. Keeping your fire durations in mind will make a huge difference in your damage output, especially when it comes to combos and leading your enemies. A nifty trick to keep track of your fires, other than literally looking at the in-game timer or keeping a clock running, is through the ability charges. If you fire anything more than 3 charges at a time, then the fires will start disappearing by the time you have regained all 3. If you are just spamming fires out non-stop, then the fires will start expiring after your 5th or when you're about to fire your 6th. The fires can be stacked in one spot or spread out a little bit if you want to deal damage over a larger area, and since they have a range of 3 meters, they are a lot more forgiving than it might seem at first glance. If you're trying to snipe enemies and get the most damage out of your fires, then it might make sense to place the fires behind your target and then throwing a fire right in front of them, which forces them to walk backwards into an already existing fire. You'd be surprised how often this actually works. Now the Blazing Blast is a core staple in Human Torch's kit, as it ties into almost all of your other abilities, but sadly, they are very tricky to use, and if you misuse them, they literally do nothing. That being said, I've figured it out, so you don't have to. The easiest rule of thumb for these flames is that they can only be placed on solid ground. If you try placing them on walls, the shot will go on cooldown without actually setting the ground on fire. At the very least, I guess it will deal a little bit of damage. If the shot lands on flat, destructible environments, then it either sets the spot on fire for a little while before breaking the environment and disappearing, or just instantly breaking what you are shooting at. The consolation here is that your secondary has a lot more destructive power than any of your other abilities. If your secondary fire hits a grounded enemy point blank, then they will take the explosive damage and have a fire set under their feet. And other than walls stopping you from actually starting a fire, this is going to be the main reason as to why you don't have the fires land where you actually want them to, as depending on the angle, the fire will land somewhere completely different than you wanted them to if an enemy cuts it off. Heads up, this also doesn't apply to placeables or heroes that use placeables like Punisher and his turret, but you actually have a hero-specific counter here, since you can place your fire on the ground next to him, and if he doesn't notice or pay attention, then he will burn to death. Placing your fires next to a certain valuable placements like Rocket Spear B is also incredibly valuable. And also, if the secondary fire hits a shield, then it will only deal a little bit of shield damage, and that's it. Now, managing your secondary fire cooldowns and durations will be a never-ending mind game if you want to reach the highest potential damage output when you're playing the Human Torch. We're gonna cover some of the uses later, but for now, one good way of using them can be weaving them in when you're fighting singular targets, by firing your primary and then cutting off the animation with your secondary, and then repeating that over and over again over most ranges. You can take down an enemy just about as fast as if you were spamming your primary fire, and over longer ranges even faster. I mean, past 40 meters or so, I wouldn't even bother using your primary fire and only poking with the secondary fire to begin with, though those uses include his next ability, Pyro Prison. Human Torch's next ability, Pyro Prison, to connect these previously placed fires together to cause damage to nearby enemies. If you place and connect 2 fires, then you would draw a straight line between them. Enemies crossing through these lines will take 65 damage every time they pass through. If you place and connect 3 or more fires, then you draw a shape between them. Enemies still take damage from touching the walls, but in addition to that, they also take 50 continuous damage per second if they spend any time inside of the zone. The fires can be connected as long as they are within 40 meters away from each other horizontally, and with no more of a height difference than 2 meters. Now, as for placement, this is important. The fires can be connected through walls, but at the same time, if there is any obstruction, including those walls, or even something like a small piece of cover or just a pebble, then they won't actually properly connect and they won't deal damage within the zone, even though there's a visible fire and zone. Because of this, you always need to be mindful when you're setting up your Pyro Prison so it doesn't pass through any obstacle. When putting these fires out, I normally have an idea of how I want the zone to look beforehand, and I kind of draw imaginary lines in my head every time I place it to make sure there isn't going to be any kind of collision. Eventually, you'll learn setups that work, and you can easily repeat them without having to think too much about it. I have seen some people covering fire lineups on TikTok and even on Reddit and so many of our social medias, and if you guys are interested in a huge compilation of some fire setups, let me know in the comments and hit the subscribe button so you don't miss it. But in the meantime, you can post your favorite lineups on my Reddit at r/ottr_submissions. But a few obvious ones will be placing fires in front of the enemy spawns when you are defending, putting fire on the high ground that they are playing or through the chokes that they have to push through, as well as across the point if possible. Just be mindful if there is a payload, since it sometimes counts as an obstacle, which cuts off the firewalls and stops it from dealing any damage at all. Pyro Prison is actually your primary damage dealer and ultimate ability farmer. If anything, you could argue that the Pyro Prison could be on the weaker side of an ultimate as far as its strength and ability goes. I've found that placement matters just as much as timing, and you need to know where your enemies are going to want to be in the next, 5 to 10 seconds if you want to get actual value out of it. Normally, placing it in areas where enemies want to hold up and hold positions will get you the best results, or setting it up right when they're about to push up. That being said, contrary to popular belief, people aren't really that dumb. And if you put the Pyro Prison up, then they're going to see the big firewalls and either wait them out or walk around them. If that keeps happening to you, then I suggest putting up the fires and then waiting for the enemies to enter the prison area before activating the ability. It doesn't take that long to start taking damage, and it throws them off guard since they didn't see the fire going in, while still letting you get a lot of damage in. We already know that the fires stay up for 5 seconds after being placed, so you can just use the in-game timer or count it down in your head after placing that first fire. You can also just keep replacing the oldest one for a few seconds after they start to expire if the enemies are taking the sweet time actually getting in position inside of the fires. After placing your flame prison, all your fires will be renewed to that 5-second duration, no matter how long they were there previously. This lets you keep even more fires out at a time without wasting as many cooldowns, which can be good to know about if you're going for certain combos or if you just want to cover as much as ground or be as efficient as possible. Additionally, your fire cooldowns are still renewing as usual when the Pyro Prison is active, so thanks to this, you can gas your Pyro Prison up even more by throwing out fires against your enemies for an even higher damage per second. You can also sort of extend the range of a Pyro Prison by throwing the fires right outside of its edges as well, which can be helpful if an enemy steps out of range or if you accidentally made it too small. And understanding what the enemy wants to do and how they want to reposition themselves when they are inside the fire is pretty easy, because as soon as they notice that they are on fire, then they will usually take the shortest path to the exit, so all you need to do is aim ahead of them and put your fires as they keep moving. Human Torch's next ability, Flaming Meteor, really brings the whole kit together. Activating the ability instantly slams you downwards towards the Crosshair, dealing 40 damage to and knocking back any enemies that are hit. Upon impact, any fires within range of the slam will also blow up, dealing an additional 55 damage per fire. This makes it a pretty useful tool to secure kills, in addition to letting you one-shot any squishies if they are right on top of the 3 fires, as long as you slam right on top of them. If they somehow survive the slam, then you can just shoot them, since they're being knocked back in a pretty predictable arc after being launched backwards. The Flaming Meteor travels at the same speed as your secondary fire, so it's a pretty good habit to fire the secondary fire and then cancel that animation with your slam for an additional almost 100 damage for no additional effort. While you're always flying, the Flaming Meteor can only be activated as long as you're above about 3 meters off the ground. I couldn't figure out the maximum range for it, but in short, other than the minimum height, it seems that you can use the slam against solid ground across most, if not any range, as long as your path to the impact point stays within a certain angle. It is important to be wary of when and how you use the Meteor. Sure, it is a good damage and displacement tool. If you use it in the wrong way, then you're getting focused and all you're doing is sending an Amazon Prime delivery of a free kill to the enemy. Not to mention that all you can do is awkwardly float out of the way afterwards. Normally, I suggest trying to slam enemies where there is cover that you can retreat to after the slam. If there is a ceiling or some type of cover or window you can fly into, or another floor you can get on top of that cuts off the line of sight after the slam, then you are usually going to be fine and survive. A really cool trick that I found for the Meteor is that since using your Pyro Prison refreshes your fire duration, which lets you keep them up for longer, in addition to having even more of them active, then you can pre-place a few fire close to each other where you think an enemy will come out of, and then keep spamming fires until they eventually get close. At 6 fires, this gives you a burst of at least 400 damage with the slam, not counting the additional fire damage on the enemy, which one-shots most squishies even if they aren't a direct hit and destroys tanks that might be stepping onto it. it. With some of these pre-placements, I managed to snipe some supports out of their ultimates, so it is incredibly valuable. It is even forgiving enough to kill a Luna if you time it right. Speaking about the Pyro Prison, you can also cancel its full animation nearly instantly when activating the Pyro Prison with your slam, which saves you a little bit of time, and it's important to know about because sometimes missing out on canceling your animations can cost you a kill that you definitely would have gotten otherwise, especially with a hero like the Human Torch. That's not to mention that thanks to how strong Human Torch's boop is, you can also just straight up boop enemies off of the map without any issue. You can also boop enemies out of position into your team by slamming behind them or messing with certain priority targets like booping an enemy invisible woman out of her ultimate to kill her. You can also find a lot of value by combining your boop ability with your ultimate by throwing the enemies into the fire tornadoes, which we will talk about in a little bit. A great and very underrated use of Human Torch's slam is of course using it as an escape. Let's say you're floating a little bit too far out and you start taking unexpected damage that you are pretty sure you won't be able to survive. Instead of slowly floating out of the way with or without your speed boost and melee spam, which definitely will get you killed, you can also decide to use your slam away into safety. This is a cornerstone in your kit to stay alive as Johnny, so make sure that one of your first reflexes once you start taking too much pressure is turning around 180 degrees and slamming towards your healers, or at the very least behind cover or out of line of sight. Human Torch's ultimate Supernova turns him into a supernova, dealing a blast of 70 damage to any nearby enemies and leveling up his secondary fire. These fires now turn into massive fire tornadoes with the same horizontal range but a much higher vertical range that take nearby enemies for 100 damage per second, and the damage from these tornadoes stacks, so if you place all 4 in one spot, then they will burn nearby enemies for 400 whopping damage a second, out damaging any support ultimates in the game. During the ultimate, Human Torch also receives a 30% damage reduction, and using the Plasma Body ability no longer costs any stamina, meaning you can use it for however long you want. Obviously, Plasma Body still gets cancelled by using the same abilities or by shooting, so nothing really changes on that regard, but it is good to know if you need to get out in or out of a fight quickly. Additionally, your secondary fire no longer has a cooldown, meaning you can spam tornadoes as much as you want. That being said, you can only have 4 tornadoes active at a time, so if you keep spamming it, it's gonna keep replacing your oldest ones. Activating the ability cancels your slam ability mid-charge, but it can also be an animation cancel after the slam hits, so you could also perform an additional one-shot combo by putting down 2 fires, slamming after the second one, and then using an ultimate right after the damage applies. That being said, it's kind of a niche tech and it's more helpful to full combo one-shot tanks or ulting supports in specific cases more than anything, but it is good to know that the additional source of damage exists when you do need it. As for the tornadoes, they feel very underwhelming and they take a moment after landing before they're primed to start making damage over time. That being said, after that they will keep ticking, meaning enemies that step into them or get within range will start taking damage almost instantly. Depending on the situation and range, I'll either just spam the enemies with the secondary when I am far away, trying to dish out as much damage from the first hit with any additional damage just being extra, or fire a primary followed by a secondary, and then repeating that, weaving for as long as necessary if they're close enough, assuming my primary fire matters. You could use the ultimate for zoning purposes, and thanks to its high damage, it could even theoretically destroy enemies through any support ultimates. But it is so easy for the enemies to walk out of the way, so I would normally recommend combining it with other stunning or movement impairing abilities like Groot's or the Thing's ultimates for the best effect. Speaking of zoning, you could just place 4 tornadoes with equal spacing between them to cut off an entire area or choke that the enemies want to rotate through, much like you would with your Pyro Prison. And if they walk through, they will take a ton of damage. Just as I mentioned with your secondary, you will normally have the most value against an enemy by placing the fires behind them and then scaring them back into it by placing a fire in front of them, or in this case a tornado. Forcing enemies to continually make that choice, especially if it's between a rock and a hard place, will keep them uncomfortable and prone to taking a lot of damage or making mistakes. The fire tornadoes still count as fires, so if you slam into them, they will still deal that additional damage bonus that you would get from slamming into the enemies under normal circumstances. That being said, you can't use the Pyro Prison with your tornadoes, but since activating your ultimate doesn't turn your existing fires into tornadoes, this means that you can create a prison after activating your ultimate if you had any fires active prior to that. Because of that, it is a very good idea to create a Pyro Prison right before using your ultimate, so you can stack the Pyro Prison damage with the damage from your tornadoes. Also, while your existing fires won't turn into a tornado, if you do activate your ultimate right after hitting your secondary fire, then your current outbound fire will turn into a tornado as it lands. This is kind of just a small tech to throw enemies off guard, and it actually works a lot more than you would think. I love using the ultimate against Invisible Woman when she uses hers, since 2 of my tornadoes will outdamage her own healing, and all 4 will absolutely shred anyone who is inside. An enemy is pretty likely to be sitting inside of the ultimate thinking that they are safe the entire time. It will be especially effective if you already have your Pyro Prison set up surrounding it. Follow that up with a huge slam and boom, you got a massive team wipe on your hands. Thanks to their huge range, you can also place the tornadoes all around something like the enemy payload, as this practically forces them to take damage if they need to play close to it or if they are pushing in overtime. Next up are the Season 1 team-ups that are subject to change, so if you are seeing this guide past Season 1, you could just skip ahead to the rest of the guide, which includes positioning and a lot of additional tips. We'll always make sure to post updated versions of these guides after new big patches, but if you want to stay in the know with all the small changes and as I continue discovering things you can do in these heroes, I will be personally updating the scripts with new information, and you can access those over at patreon.com/ottr. Anyways, the first team up, Storm Siblings, is an active team up ability that you can use if there is an Invisible Woman on the team. Activating the ability adds a buffer of 100 bonus health, and as long as you have more than 100 health missing, it will add up to an additional 100 bonus health for you. I feel like this ability might be a must-have for Human Torch to really have some value, especially as a flyer who normally gets neglected by his healers, especially in the mid to lower ends of the ranked spectrum. Activating this ability right before you start taking damage or right before you all in on an enemy with something like your dash or slam will make a huge difference with your survivability. His second team up, Omega Fire, is a 2-man ultimate combo between Storm and Human Torch, when both of them have their ultimates ready and activate them one after another. With Storm's ultimate touching one of Johnny's fire tornadoes, Storm's ultimate grows in size and deals significantly more damage. The fire tornadoes that are within her ultimate are also upgraded to a wider and a taller radius. They also deal 110 damage each from the previous 100. When within range of each other's team up conditions after one of the ultimates have been popped, either Storm or Human Torch can also start the combo by hitting their team up button. If you combine Storm's ultimate with a well-placed fire tornado, then you will easily have enough damage to burn through any defensive ultimates. It's also easier to chew through them thanks to the increased range from the larger tornadoes, as well as Storm taking them with additional damage. Though, that being said, the combo needs a lot of coordination to actually pull off, since it can be pretty hard to get value from it. The easiest way to pull this off is by having Johnny ulting first and throwing a fire tornado out into the enemies, after which Storm uses the team up button while looking at the tornado, which teleports her to the tornado with her ultimate out. Without the combined damage, it kind of just tickles, especially if there are shields in the way, so make sure you guys set it up properly if you do go for it. Moving on from the team up, let's talk positioning and target focus. It is no secret that Human Torch is a big, slow flying target, and other than using the slam to dive out of the way, he doesn't really have any reliable movement abilities, which means you'd want to play far away, right? Well, kinda. You also don't do much damage if you're too away from your targets either. The ideal positioning for Human Torch will be playing sort of far back in the sky behind any walls or signs or some type of cover that you can stay behind in case the enemies have the ability to poke you down. Depending on their heroes, whether they have direct counters or hit scan or poke heroes, and if they're focusing you or not, you can play farther up, but generally speaking, you want to stay pretty far behind in the sky while dishing out poke with your secondary fire and setting up your Pyro Prisons, which is a lot easier to do if you have a vantage point rather than being up close. Just make sure that your healers do have a line of sight to you if you end up needing some healing, which you might, and in most cases, you probably shouldn't expect reliable heals from your team unless you have something like a Luna with her blessing on you. Once the team fights turn into a brawl, you can try looking for fire stacks to get the one-shot combos off, which inevitably closes the gap. You can also try to fly closer if you feel the enemies are distracted or they aren't paying attention or focusing you, which lets you weave in primary and do some pretty decent damage. Just be ready to get out of the way when playing up ahead if you feel like you start taking too much focus. As for target focus, it does sort of depend on what phase of a fight that you're in. In the poking stage, you want to put as much pressure on as many enemies as possible, but ideally the ones posing a threat to you as a flyer first and foremost, and then the supports, and finally the tanks, though this isn't really a rule set in stone and sort of a suggestion if anything. That being said, if you do deal with the enemy punisher who is, focusing you, you'll find just how easy the game gets, as you can fly up a lot more aggressively the next 10 to 30 seconds or however long it takes for him to get back. Just keep in mind that you will lose that space as soon as he does come back, so you don't want to overstay either and turn into a free kill once he ziplines back in. I suggest trying to deal with placeables, especially the annoying ones like Namor's turrets that deny you all your space, but it's worth mentioning that you will have a hard time dealing with them on your own with your own kit because of your lack of damage over range, especially if they are placed on walls. As for bans, you'd think that hit scan heroes like Punisher or Hela are going to be your biggest problem, so you'd want to ban them, right? Well, surprisingly, they're actually a lot more easy to deal with compared to his actual hard counters, since all you need to do to deal with them is sit farther back and spam your secondary until the map opens up. What I found from my solo to celestial grind is that surprisingly, Spider-Man and Scarlet Witch, and I guess Namor, pose the biggest problems for you as a Human Torch. Scarlet Witch can fly up and harass you with her first ability, and she's pretty difficult to hit with your projectiles, even after the buff, and if she's too far away, you don't really have a good spread anyways, so she can easily outdamage you, and Spider-Man can straight up one-shot combo murder you without breaking a sweat. You can use your slam to get out of the way when he does the combo, but depending on the timing, he might end up catching you midair, stopping your escape, and just killing you outright. I'm not sure how worthwhile it is to ban Scarlet Witch or Spider-Man, but it is something I ended up doing to actually have some impact in a few games, so it is worth considering if no other bans are going down. Namor, however, is not only a meta hero, but a massive pain for Human Torch. If he places his squids on the walls, like I said, then you can't even destroy the squids yourself, and you'll be forced to play grounded or behind cover because of how oppressive that they are. Namor is also a pretty much meta pick at the moment, so banning him is pretty fair game. I do want to mention that Human Torch, especially after his buff, is one of the best airborne duelists in the game. If you can close the gap, then you might have the fastest burst damage against any airborne target, especially Iron Man and then Storm. Iron Man might win mid-range engagements and Storm will win longer range engagements, but your close range superiority is not to be dismissed, and if anything, you could even try to sneak up on them or set up traps to catch them out. Thanks to your shotgun primary, if you aim it well enough, it can also be enough to destroy certain dive characters that otherwise would prove a problem, including Spider-Man or Magic if they mess their combos up. Moving on with heroes that you want on your team, many would argue that the Storm and Human Torch combination is too good to pass up on, but honestly, I feel like the team up is a bit of a disappointment more often than not, and not to mention that a team consisting of double flyers makes you prone to counter picks. Having a Luna Snow in your team as a flyer makes a huge difference because she can put her blessing on you and keep you healed up even if she isn't looking your way. Additionally, having Invisible Woman makes a huge difference thanks to the team up that I mentioned previously, but also because of how strong she is in general, especially because she can keep moving your shield around to protect you midair, not to mention how you can combine placing your fires or even tornadoes inside of her invisibility field to deal damage to unsuspecting enemies. As for crosshairs or settings, as I mentioned previously, turning your sprint ability to toggle will make a huge difference. There isn't really anything worth mentioning on the crosshair side, just make sure you get a minimal crosshair that you don't struggle with reading enemies or the crosshair across any ranges, but especially up close, as you need to line up your meat shots with some pretty huge flicks pretty often. And finally, I decided to make a new section of these guides from this video moving forward that I like to call high impact plays. These are the plays that you want to make to extend beyond what is expected of you as a damage dealer in this case, that will make a huge difference in the outcome of the game. If you want to actually have an impact on your game other than just trading damage and just dealing with whatever you're given, these are the ones you really need to hone in on. First, we have the backline dives. If you can line up 3 to 5 flames and have them ready to slam down on an enemy squishy, follow with you one-shotting them and getting out of the fight safely, then this can let you take a priority target out of the fight, sometimes even early or through healers, which lets you and your team snowball a fight into a win. Picking a support, an enemy with their ultimate, or the enemy team's solo carry if they have one, can turn a lost game into a very winnable one. Mastering the fire placements and slams makes a huge difference to your output in a game, and if you can consistently get 1 or even 2 one-shots off in a fight, then you will easily be able to snowball and stagger the enemy team. Something that's even harder to pull off but infinitely more valuable is doing this against enemies that are mid ultimate or mid support ultimate. Punisher is easy to destroy with a primed slam, but as I mentioned earlier, with enough flames you can take down any support, including a Luna Snow. Speaking of which, most maps have death pits, and specifically death pits alongside common rotation points. If you know your enemies are going to play anywhere near the pits, or if they're going to rotate past them, then using a quick slam can easily knock them off of the map, which leads to a free pick even without the fire setup. This is strong enough to completely win your games, especially if you knock down a tank that you struggle with dealing with otherwise, or somebody who's just not paying attention. A perfect map to secure knocks on any enemies that play on the pit side is of course Hydra Charteris base, but that doesn't mean there aren't equally strong boops on other maps like outside of the first spawn on Spider Islands. Death pits by spawns are especially valuable because you can theoretically fly around to those spawns after securing 1 or 2 picks and knock an unsuspecting enemy off of the map without them even realizing what's going on before it's too late, with the added benefit of potentially tilting them and causing a mental boom which wins you the game. Next up we have harassment. While you can deal a lot of damage as a Human Torch, one of your main values is harassing the enemy team and making them uncomfortable. Sadly, because of your slow kit, it might be hard to be as deep inside of the enemy backlines as you might want to be, but using a combination of your fires, Pyro Prison, and overall presence with damage against where the enemies want to play, you're able to get inside of the enemies' heads and stop them from feeling comfortable. They need to both look for you as a flyer while also trying not to stand inside of a fire on the ground, which forces them onto their back foot. This makes them more prone to make mistakes, and as long as you stay alive, they will never play anywhere near their peak potential. Depending on the lobby, keeping the pressure up might even cause tilt and infighting. And if you're playing soloq, causing tilt and infighting is the way to win. Sadly, Human Torch only has a handful of high impact plays that he can do, but that makes him a bit simpler to carry with in the sense that your gameplay loop, in addition to playing your kit and role, should be focused on getting these high impact plays to, well, have an impact. There are probably more high impact tricks out there that I forgot to mention, but I will keep writing them down and add them to the script for future versions of the video. And if you guys are interested in those at any time, just check out the Patreon. But anyways, that was it for now. Thank you so much for watching. Hope this helps, and if you guys want to see the pre-buff Human Torch in action, check out the video on the screen. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all next time. Peace out.